When the Galactic Council appointed Xylor of the Threxian Dominion to conduct a behavioral analysis of humanity's military practices, the assignment was meant to be routine, a curiosity study at best. The humans, after all, were a young and fragile species, barely out of their home system, still squabbling over resources and primitive technologies. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, they were children playing with fire. The Council didn't see them as a threat, not even as peers. They were considered amusing, erratic, harmless. But to Xylor, whose cold, multi-eyed gaze had studied 1,000 species over 3 centuries of service, something about the humans was off. Their archives were incomplete, their battle data inconsistent, their recorded strategies impossible. Every war they fought began with chaos and ended with victory that should not have been achievable by any known logic. The assignment began with a simple phrase: analyze human combat doctrine and determine potential risk to galactic stability. Easy enough, or so he thought. But then he came across the report that would change everything. The one titled, Incident 47B, The Coast Guard versus 10,000 Warships. At first, Xylor assumed it was a mistranslation. The Coast Guard? A planetary rescue division, unarmed, underfunded, its primary duty being the recovery of shipwrecked civilians and the management of weather hazards. It couldn't be right. Surely this was some human propaganda piece. Another one of their mythic, self-aggrandizing stories they called films. But the data checks confirmed the authenticity, time-stamped, verified by multiple galactic observation arrays. He leaned closer to the holo display, his dark tendrils coiling in disbelief as the incident unfolded. A coalition fleet, 10,000 warships strong, drawn from 6 different star empires, had surrounded a small human patrol sector near the edge of what humans called the Sol Dominion Zone. The aliens' objective was simple: test humanity's resolve. Force them to stand down and surrender a strategic wormhole gate. The humans refused. Not angrily, not with threats, they simply declined. Their official response, recorded forever in the Council archives, was a single line from a human admiral named Kara Ilian. Negative, we can't let you through. Civilians in transit, no bravado. No war declaration. Just that, a calm, logistical objection. The Threxian fleet leader had laughed, broadcasting on all channels that resistance was futile, that Earth's military was microscopic compared to the united force assembled before them. It wasn't even meant to be a battle. It was meant to be a demonstration. The aliens opened fire within the hour, and that, Xylor realized, was where logic ended. The human response didn't make sense by any military model. There was no defensive formation, no retreat path, no surrender protocol. Instead, their small fleet of rescue cutters and patrol vessels charged directly into the fire. Every command AI that observed the footage flagged it as an error. Every algorithm calculated human survival odds as 0, but the humans didn't seem to care. Their ships, built for atmospheric rescue, began performing maneuvers that ignored conventional physics. They slingshotted around debris, used the shockwaves of enemy missiles as propulsion, and fired makeshift railguns using cargo bay doors as launchers. It was chaos. Deliberate, orchestrated chaos. As the hours passed, Xylor noted the first anomaly in his log. Human units exhibit non-predictive behavior. Tactical models collapse after 4.6 seconds of engagement simulation. Unknown variable? Emotion or intuition? By the 3rd hour of battle, 300 alien warships had been destroyed, not by overwhelming firepower, but by accidental precision. Human vessels would collide at insane velocities, ramming enemy cruisers and detonating reactors from within. Others used damaged ships as shields or even as weapons, pushing drifting hulks into the heart of enemy formations. And then there were the comms logs, voices of laughter, humor, and music in the middle of slaughter. "Hey, Jim, if we don't make it, tell my wife I still hate her cooking." "Copy that, sir, but I'll need her recipe before we die." The aliens were horrified. The humans were entertained. Xylor watched as the numerical feed turned into nonsense. Loss projections reversed. Probability graphs broke. The Coalition Armada, 10,000 warships, each armed with quantum torpedoes and gravitational mines, was being systematically dismantled by a defense force whose ships didn't even have shields. It wasn't just illogical. It was statistically impossible. He scrolled through the battle feed over and over, checking for tampering. There was none. Every recorded frame, every sensor echo was real. And as he zoomed in on a specific fragment of the battle, a human cutter performing a suicide dive through a burning debris field, he noticed something that froze his spines. The maneuver was calculated. The pilot wasn't panicking. He was smiling. The Threxian analyst paused the footage there, his hands trembling. "Who taught them this?" he muttered to himself. "Who designed a doctrine that uses death as a vector?" He accessed older human wars for comparison, their early planetary conflicts, their internal battles fought before joining galactic civilization. And there it was again, the same patterns. Humans didn't just fight to survive, they learned while dying. Every defeat became data, every mistake a future weapon. They adapted faster than any algorithm, improvised faster than any commander. The human genius wasn't in strength or numbers. It was in the quiet madness that told them, we can make anything work if we have to. The final moment of the battle was pure, devastating elegance. The human commander, Admiral Ilian, transmitted a short message to the alien armada after their flagship collapsed into a singularity caused by their own misfired torpedo. The message contained no threats, no celebration, just this: all hostiles neutralized. Request permission to resume rescue operations. The galactic analysts went silent for days. When Xylor finally submitted his preliminary report, it contained only one sentence. Humanity's concept of defense is indistinguishable from total warfare. But that wasn't the part that haunted him. The part that truly kept him awake was what happened afterward. When the surviving alien ships broadcasted distress calls, the humans were the first to respond. They rescued the very enemies they had just annihilated, fed them, treated their wounds, and even offered engineering assistance to repair their surviving hulls. It was mercy that terrified the galaxy more than the war itself. And as Xylor reviewed the footage again, late into the silent hours of his research bay, one question echoed endlessly in his mind, a question he would one day pose to the Council. If this is what humanity's rescue fleet can do, what happens when their war fleet arrives? The second report began with silence. Xylor could not find words that adequately described what he had witnessed. Every other species in the galaxy had predictable war patterns, formations, casualty thresholds, surrender signals, retreat markers. Humanity, however, did not. They fought as if pain was irrelevant, as if destruction was a language only they could speak fluently. His claws hovered above the datapad for a long time before he finally began to write, "Humans are not at war with us. They are performing an experiment." That phrase alone sent shivers through the Council. The first engagement had been an unintentional skirmish, at least according to official records. 10,000 coalition warships, a mix of Vicar dreadnoughts, tall cruisers, and even the proudest Elari battle carriers, had entered the Sol frontier to enforce what they called a strategic quarantine. They expected negotiation. What they found instead was a small flotilla of human vessels, mostly Coast Guard cutters, patrol corvettes, and 2 outdated destroyers. The coalition believed it would be over in minutes. Xylor had thought so too, but the humans didn't act like cornered animals. They acted like hunters waiting for someone to walk into their trap. The alien sensors had barely begun to register weapon locks when every human vessel moved, not in panic but in purpose. They didn't form ranks or defensive lines. They scattered, weaving through enemy fire with impossible precision. Coalition commanders, confused, recalibrated their targeting systems, only to realize the humans were using debris and even destroyed ships as kinetic shields. And then came the impossible part. The first human cutter, the Sparrowhawk, went silent. It didn't retreat. It accelerated, straight into the core formation of Vicar cruisers. No escape pods, no distress signals, just raw thrust and intent. The collision tore through 6 alien ships, triggering a chain of explosions that shattered the entire flank. Every species in the galaxy feared death. Humans apparently weaponized it. The analyst's report described it clinically, but his inner voice trembled. They do not fear destruction, he wrote. They calculate it. To them, every loss was a variable in an equation. Every suicide maneuver was a message. It wasn't bravery and it was strategy. The Galactic Council, used to fighting wars that ended with treaties and diplomacy, suddenly realized they were facing a species that viewed survival as optional if victory required sacrifice. As Xylor reviewed battle logs, his appendages quivered involuntarily. The humans were laughing on comms, laughing. As ships disintegrated around them, as friends vanished in bursts of plasma, their voices carried calm humor. Adjusting heading. Target acquired. For the record, tell my mom I was right about joining the Coast Guard. The analyst replayed that line 17 times before noting it in his report as evidence of psychological instability. But deep down, he knew it wasn't madness, it was something worse, composure. The battle's turning point came when a small, barely armed vessel designated CG-77 Providence drifted toward the Coalition flagship. Sensors showed its engines offline, power minimal, hull breaches venting atmosphere. Coalition admirals ordered all fire to cease. They wanted to capture it, to display the broken human ship as a trophy. Then a single life sign appeared. Sergeant Michael Thompson. Thompson didn't radio, didn't plead, didn't surrender. Instead, he rerouted every remaining watt of power to the emergency escape pod system. But instead of launching it away, he locked it in place, rewired its guidance system, and triggered the main thrusters. The tiny pod, designed for evacuation, became a guided missile. It slammed directly into the flagship's fusion core. The resulting explosion could be seen from orbit around Mars. One escape pod, took down a vessel the size of a small... CityDoc Xylor's report described the event with chilling simplicity. The humans treat engineering limits as polite suggestions. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an extinction. The Coalition's 10,000 ships were reduced to drifting wreckage within hours. The human flotilla lost nearly every vessel, but not a single one of their crews surrendered. Those few who survived transmitted coordinates for evacuation, not rescue, as if they had already prepared for this outcome. As if they had expected to die and made peace with it. The casualty ratio was beyond reason. For every human ship destroyed, over 200 enemy vessels fell. The math didn't make sense. Xylor checked for data corruption. There was none. When he presented it to the Galactic Council, they called it statistically impossible. He replied softly, "So are the humans." That phrase became famous. Engraved on the walls of the council hall, whispered in fear by admirals. The galaxy, which had always viewed humanity as primitive upstarts from a blue planet, suddenly understood why they had survived so many internal wars, why they had fought each other for millennia and still stood tall. They were the only species that considered war not as chaos, but as an art, and they had perfected it through failure. Every lost war, every burned city, every collapsed empire had taught them something the rest of the galaxy never learned: how to adapt under fire. As the council argued about possible ceasefires, Xylor noticed something peculiar in human transmissions. After the battle, human commanders didn't celebrate. They didn't broadcast victory anthems or demand territory. They simply said operation complete, awaiting orders. And then they shut off their transmitters. To Xylor, that silence was the most terrifying part of all, because it meant they weren't done. He ended his second report with a line that would echo for centuries. The humans do not fight for conquest. They fight because you gave them a reason. Take that reason away, or they will give you extinction. And so the council, shaken and humiliated, sent envoys to Earth to beg for peace. They offered reparations, territory, and even trade privileges. The humans listened politely, then declined most of it. They said, "We don't want your worlds. We just wanted you to stop pointing guns at ours." Xylor couldn't decide if that made them merciful, or gods pretending to be humble. Before closing his file, he added one final observation, meant only for himself, a note the council never saw. If humans ever forget to be merciful, there will be no one left to remind them. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so silent. Entire empires that once shouted over each other for attention now sat motionless, trembling in the blue glow of the tactical holomap. 10,000 red markers, their fleet, had gone dark. Only 22 blue markers remained. Humanity's Coast Guard, not even their navy, had annihilated the combined strength of 5-star nations. The silence stretched until the Vekar warlord broke it, slamming his claws onto the obsidian table. "This must be falsified!" he roared. No species can achieve this ratio. No fleet this small, but the recording didn't care for his outrage. It played on, the hologram showing human ships darting like silver knives through an ocean of fire. Every explosion reflected in the dark glass walls. Every suicide charge, every calm radio transmission, every act of defiance replayed in brutal, undeniable detail. And at the center of it all, that one final flash. Sergeant Thompson's pod hitting the flagship. A silent bloom of light, Sealor stood before them, motionless. His reports had been questioned before, but never feared. Now, even the High Chancellor of the Elari Empire, who had personally overseen the annexation of 9 planets, refused to meet his gaze. "They are not gods," Xylor said finally. "They are disciplined chaos." The phrase spread like wildfire across the council. Every translator struggled with it. Disciplined chaos? The words didn't fit together. But that was the problem. Neither did humans. The council's science division tried to rationalize the loss. They blamed statistical anomalies, luck, or experimental weaponry. But Xylor knew better. He had studied their patterns, their history, their psyche. He'd watched them turn natural disasters into training exercises, wars into industries, and despair into strategy. He played a clip from Earth's archives, ancient footage from their early 21st century. A human pilot ejecting from a burning jet, calm as he fell, reporting his altitude mid-descent. A firefighter walking through an inferno, steady voice guiding others to safety. Soldiers cracking jokes moments before charging into death. "They've been training for this for thousands of years," Xylor whispered. Every war they fought against themselves was practice. That was when the panic truly began. Every empire had skeletons in its history, wars, atrocities, old mistakes. But humanity's records were endless. Genocides, revolutions, betrayals, yet they endured. They evolved through suffering instead of collapsing under it. To them, pain wasn't an ending. It was data, the tall diplomat tried to laugh. "They're primitives. You exaggerate their power." Xylor turned to him. "Tell me, Ambassador, how do your people handle loss?" The tall hesitated. "We retreat, regroup, negotiate. And the humans?" Xylor tilted his head. "They reload." A murmur of fear rippled through the chamber. Then came the most disturbing part of his presentation. The black box recovered from the Sparrowhawk. A final recording, audio only, captured seconds before the cutter's impact. A human voice, calm, tired, but not afraid. "Tell command the party's over. See you on the other side. No screams, no panic. Just acceptance. And maybe even a touch of humor." That small fragment broke something inside the council. They had spent centuries perfecting war machines, building massive fleets, and designing weapons that vaporized planets. And yet, here was a species that weaponized attitude. It wasn't their ships, their guns, or their numbers that made them dangerous. It was their refusal to quit. Within days, the Council's military advisors started issuing directives. Do not engage human vessels unless necessary. Some systems even went as far as marking Sol as a red exclusion zone. The galaxy began to whisper. The humans were not conquerors, but something far worse. Survivors who refused to die properly. But Xylor wasn't finished studying them. His next observation came from intercepted human communications. While the Council was losing sleep over the destruction of their armada, the humans were joking about it online. Memes, songs, video edits, humor about the Coast Guard versus 10,000 warships. They treated it like a sports victory. To Xylor, it was unthinkable. How could a species laugh after such carnage? He spent hours analyzing it, replaying the chatter, the music, the tone. Then it hit him. Humor was their psychological armor. Laughter was how they processed horror. "They've turned trauma into fuel," he wrote. "Where we fracture, they forge." The Council issued an emergency directive to avoid human contact. But it was already too late. Word of humanity's impossible victory spread across the galaxy, to fringe empires, pirate clans, mercenary syndicates. Every civilization had to ask the same haunting question. If this is what they do with their Coast Guard, what would their actual navy look like? Even the most aggressive species began sending diplomatic offers. Some begged to form alliances, others offered tribute. Humanity accepted only a few, quietly, politely, then went back to their normal lives, as if saving their planet from 10,000 ships had been just another Tuesday. Xylor couldn't decide whether that was arrogance or indifference. Maybe both. But deep inside, he knew something the Council didn't want to admit. Humanity's power wasn't in their weapons. It was in their expectation of failure. They went into battle already assuming they might die. And that acceptance made them unstoppable. When you have nothing left to lose, fear has no leverage. The analyst's final presentation to the Council concluded with a grim slide. Casualty statistics. 9,056 enemy ships destroyed. Human casualties estimated 98%. Victory total. The High Chancellor's voice trembled. And you call this victory? Xylor nodded slowly. To them, yes. Because every survivor will teach the next generation how they did it. He paused. Looking at the Council members, the most powerful beings in the galaxy, now cowering behind bureaucracy and pride. They don't just fight wars, he said softly. They evolve through them. The chamber fell silent again. Somewhere outside, through the crystal dome of the station, stars burned quietly, countless worlds waiting, unaware that a small blue planet had just rewritten the rules of war. Xylor turned off his display and whispered the words that would echo across empires. The galaxy is not ready for humanity. But humanity has always been ready for the galaxy. The message to Earth began with 27 signatures, emperors, warlords, high chancellors, and monarchs who had never agreed on anything before. The transmission was heavily encrypted, sent through 3 relay systems, cloaked with enough security that even the humans couldn't trace its origin immediately. Its tone was unprecedented, a request for peace, delivered in the language of surrender. Xylor was there when it was drafted. He had been promoted to chief analyst by then, not because he wanted the position, but because no one else would touch anything that involved humans. His reports had become classified at the highest level. Even saying the word human out loud in council chambers now required clearance. Begin with humility, the chancellor instructed the scribes. They respect that, do they? Xylor asked quietly, his mandibles tightening. The chancellor hesitated. We hope so. Hope. That was new. The council, the same arrogant body that had once called itself the voice of the civilized galaxy, was now hoping that a single planetary species would not destroy them by accident. The final message was short. We acknowledge the errors of aggression. The coalition seeks peace and mutual understanding with the human species. We request a diplomatic dialogue to ensure future harmony. No one in the chamber said the word surrender, but everyone heard it echo anyway. When the reply came from Earth, it didn't arrive as a broadcast or a fleet. It came as a simple, calm transmission from a human representative named Captain Evelyn Rhodes. No entourage, no threats, just one woman in a Navy uniform standing before a background of Earth's oceans and clouds. Her words were measured, polite, almost disarmingly so. The United Earth Defense Network acknowledges your message. We have no interest in further conflict. The Sol system will remain closed to foreign military presence. Should that boundary be respected, we will consider the matter settled. No demands. No reparations. No boasts of victory, just closure. It terrified the Council more than any threat could have, because it wasn't vengeance. It was finality. The humans didn't need to destroy anyone. They had already proven they could, and chose not to. That was worse. One Aelari general whispered, "They've learned mercy." Xylor shook his head. No, they've redefined it. The months that followed were a strange kind of peace. The Council's fleets quietly withdrew from Sol territory. Entire research departments were dedicated to studying humanity, not their weapons, but their psychology. Cultural historians sifted through human art, literature, and archives, searching for clues. How could a species born on a single world of chaos learn to thrive in destruction? What they found only deepened the mystery. Human myths were full of war, sacrifice, and rebirth. They sang songs of soldiers who died smiling, of explorers who vanished into the unknown, of failures turned into triumphs. Their religion spoke of endurance through suffering. Their history was a cycle of ruin and renewal, repeated until it became instinct. They don't fear the end, Xylor noted in his new report. They see it as transformation. That realization began to unsettle more than the Council. It began to change them. Military academies rewrote their doctrines. Generals quoted human commanders. Engineers studied human ship designs, trying to understand how their crude, inefficient vessels moved with such elegance in battle. They discovered that human systems weren't built for perfection. They were built for improvisation. Redundancy on redundancy, one Vakar admiral muttered. It's chaos. But it works, Zilor smiled faintly. That's the point. The story of the Coast Guard versus 10,000 warships became a legend across the stars. Some called it myth, others called it propaganda. But those who had seen the data knew better. The humans, meanwhile, returned to their daily lives. Their fleets didn't expand. Their military budgets didn't skyrocket. They simply continued, business as usual. It was as if annihilating a galactic armada had been a brief inconvenience, now filed under Tuesday incidents. That calm, that terrifying normalcy was what haunted the rest of the galaxy. It wasn't that humanity didn't care, it was that they had already accepted war as a part of existence. To them, victory and loss were two sides of the same coin. Both were experience, both were fuel, and yet something curious began to happen. Smaller civilizations, once bullied or taxed by the Council, began reaching out to Earth, not out of fear, but respect. They wanted trade. They wanted alliances. They wanted to learn. For the first time in galactic history, diplomacy began not from dominance but admiration. Humanity didn't ask for tribute or obedience. They asked for cooperation, technology exchange, and fair treatment. Their diplomats smiled, shook hands, and meant it. That confused the Council most of all. Why are they being so kind? One ambassador whispered. Chilor answered without looking up from his reports. Because they don't need anything from you. The Council's greatest fear was realized not through invasion, but through irrelevance. Humanity had proven that they didn't need the galaxy. The galaxy, on the other hand, suddenly couldn't imagine existing without humanity, and deep within that unsettling dependency, another question began to spread, whispered among scholars and soldiers alike. If humans are this powerful while being peaceful, what happens when they stop being patient? It was the question that haunted every war council, every admiral's sleep. By then, Zilor had retired from official service. But he continued writing, a secret series of reflections never published in the archives. In one entry, he summarized his fears in a single line. The humans didn't win a war. They changed how the galaxy defines one. Years later, when humanity was invited to join the Galactic Council as an equal, the vote was unanimous. Every empire, every faction, every race agreed. But as the humans' delegation entered the chamber for the first time, smiling, courteous, almost casual, every leader felt the same silent chill. They weren't welcoming humanity into the galaxy. They were hoping to keep them contained within it, because deep down, everyone knew if humanity ever decided to expand again, there wouldn't be a second plea for peace. And so Zilor's last journal entry, written in quiet reflection, concluded with a final observation. The galaxy begged humans to stop fighting, but the truth is, they never really started. Centuries passed, and humanity's legend became something more than history. It became a quiet superstition, whispered across the stars, children of alien. Worlds grew up hearing stories of the merciful, destroyers, the race that ended wars not by brute force, but by terrifying restraint. Some species depicted humans as saints, others as monsters disguised in flesh. But the one thing everyone agreed upon was this: humanity had changed the galaxy forever. Zilor lived long enough to see those changes. His once obsidian carapace had faded to gray, his movements slower, but his mind remained sharp. He spent his final years teaching at the Galactic Academy, a quiet, secluded place where cadets studied not how to fight humans, but how to understand them. He often began his lectures with the same haunting question: do you know what makes humans truly dangerous? Students would offer the usual answers: courage, technology, tactics. Zilor would shake his head. No, he'd say softly, his voice echoing through the hall. It's that they forgive, but never forget. Every generation that came after the Great Conflict tried to decipher that paradox. How could a species capable of such destruction choose peace so easily? The Council archives were filled with theories. That humans were an experiment of the universe. That they evolved alongside violence itself. That they saw reality differently. But the truth, as Zilor knew, was simpler. They had learned the cost of war long before they left their homeworld. They had burned their own skies, drowned their own cities, and clawed their way back from extinction more times than the galaxy could count. War wasn't an alien concept to them. It was an old companion, a ghost they had learned to live with and finally to control. One evening, as the twin moons of Ilara rose above the Academy's gardens, a young cadet approached Zilor after class. Her eyes glimmered with curiosity. "Sir," she said, "is it true that humans once destroyed an entire armada with just 8 ships?" He smiled faintly. 9, technically. One of them was a cargo hauler. The cadet frowned. "But how?" "We've studied the physics. It shouldn't be possible." "Physics," Xylor replied, "only matters when your enemy follows the rules." The cadet laughed, thinking it was a joke. But the old analyst's eyes told her otherwise. He often wondered what humanity was doing now. They rarely attended council meetings, and when they did, it was only to mediate disputes or offer quiet advice. They seemed disinterested in conquest, uninterested in expansion. Yet every now and then, an unidentified object would pass through deep space, small, fast, impossible to track. It never attacked, never responded to hails. But wherever it went, border conflicts stopped. Piracy vanished. Empires suddenly remembered diplomacy. The council never confirmed it, but everyone suspected the same thing. The humans were still watching, still policing the galaxy, but on their own terms. G-Lore once overheard a fellow scholar complain that humanity had grown arrogant in their silence. He smiled at that. "No," he said, "they've simply outgrown us." In his final report, sealed for council eyes only, Xylor summarized everything he had learned across his long life. The document became known as the Human Doctrine, a forbidden text taught only in strategic academies. Its last page contained a single paragraph that would haunt military minds for generations. The galaxy measures strength in numbers, weapons, and empires. Humans measure it in endurance. We fight until we win. They fight until they understand. That, he wrote, is what made them unbeatable. Decades later, when Xylor finally passed away, his students held a memorial under the starlit canopy of Alara. Among the attendees was a quiet human ambassador, uninvited, unnoticed until she spoke. She placed a single object beside the memorial stone, a small ceramic coffee mug, stained and old, with the words "Keep Going" etched across its rim. When she turned to leave, one of the students gathered the courage to ask, "Were you friends with him?" The human smiled. "In a way. He helped us remember who we used to be." The ambassador walked away before anyone could stop her, leaving behind an encrypted data crystal beside the mug. When the Academy eventually decoded it, they found a single message, simple, calm, and unmistakably human in tone. "We never left. We've just been waiting for you to grow up." The room fell silent. Some were inspired, others were afraid. A few laughed nervously, assuming it was a hoax. But deep down, everyone felt the same quiet truth settle in their bones. Humanity had been watching from the shadows. Just as Xylor had predicted, in the following centuries, whenever a new war threatened to ignite, the combatants would pause and look toward the stars, wondering if they were watching, and every time, without fail, the war would mysteriously end before it began. Trade would resume. Diplomats would speak. Fleets would withdraw. No one ever admitted why. No one ever claimed responsibility. But across 1,000 worlds, whenever the stars flickered just slightly out of rhythm, children would whisper the same bedtime phrase, "The humans are awake again." And somewhere, in a quiet station orbiting a forgotten moon, a human officer would sip coffee, glance at a holographic display filled with galactic news, and sigh. "Still fighting over the same nonsense," they'd mutter. "Guess some kids never learn." Then, with calm precision, they would mark a single file. Intervene, denied. Because humanity's greatest weapon had never been its ships, its soldiers, or its technology. It was patience, an ancient, terrible patience that outlasted empires, and in the end, when the next great darkness inevitably approached from beyond the galactic rim, it was not the Council that rose to defend civilization. It was not the fleets or the empires. It was Earth. Their message, broadcast once across all known frequencies, contained just 5 words. "We told you we'd be back." The signal faded, and the galaxy held its breath. Then, for the first time in 10,000 years, every fleet, every species, every soldier fought, not out of fear, but out of trust, because when humanity went to war again, it wasn't for dominance, it was for everyone. And deep in the archives of the Galactic Council, long after Xylor's reports had turned to dust, one simple truth remained engraved across history. They begged humans to stop fighting. They never realized, and the humans were only resting.